Hey guys, Ellen here today to talk to you about something that I actually find really fascinating, which is law and how law is applied, constitutionality, and just in general how we view state law versus national level law. And it comes down to this really interesting trial, and it's the Scopes trial or the Monkey trial. And it essentially is a trial between teaching evolution in schools or teaching creation in schools. And it's not like it just occurred overnight. It had been a really long time coming. It started when Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, which is where the idea of evolution is first introduced and is something that is beginning to take hold in the scientific community. And then in 1871, he follows up The Origin of Species with The Descent of Man, which very clearly indicates his beliefs about how evolution takes things from most simple to most complex through small changes over a course of millions and millions of years. And in The Descent of Man, he actually argues that man comes from a hairy-tailed quadruped. And he pretty much says that men are descended from monkeys or from something very similar or likened to that. Also, in 1914, there's a textbook that is published called A Civic Biology, and it's by George William Hunter, which describes evolution, and it would ultimately be what would be taught in Tennessee schools prior to the Butler Bill. And then in 1921, a representative from Tennessee, Representative Butler, introduces a bill that calls for a ban of the teaching of evolution in Tennessee public schools and instead calls for teaching creation. And this is important because it's taking something that had previously been just kind of an accepted fact in most schools in America, which was that that creation was in fact how the world began and how everything came to be, and instead takes it and makes it law. So you're really in a transitionary period in the educational system in America when evolution comes in, and whether or not it should be taught and can be taught and actually coalesces with Christian principles, whether or not we should believe Genesis as being a storyline of exactly what happened day by day by day versus saying that essentially like God can create things in whichever way that he wants to, and as a result, evolution is not incoherent or concurrent with the idea of creation and the idea of a God. But as Representative Butler introduces this bill, the Tennessee House and Senate both approve the bill, and then the governor at the time, Austin Peay, signs the bill into law March 21, 1925. And this is important because it's actually the first bill in the U.S. banning the teaching of evolution. So before, there may have been uproar about it, or it may have been something that was taught and just not really discussed, but this is the first time a state actually takes a move to ban the teaching of evolution. And then on 4 May 1925, the ACLU runs an offer in the Chattanooga Daily Times to finance a test case of the law. And this is really important because it's not actually uncommon, especially in these bigger bigger issue type topics, for larger people to come in and essentially look for test cases to try these laws to test the limits of the constitutionality. And that's ultimately what they're trying to do, is to test the constitutionality of the Butler law. As a result of this, county superintendent of schools and a couple county board members respond, and when they actually meet to find someone to be a test case for this, all of the traditional science teachers actually turn down the offer. And then they ultimately turn to a man named John Scopes. And John Scopes is only in his first year of teaching, and he actually teaches math, physics, and chemistry, and not actually biology, which where you would traditionally fit in evolution or creation or any story of the origin of human species. He doesn't actually teach that subject, but they still think that he's a viable test candidate, and as a result of that, he's actually the one who will ultimately be in this trial itself. So Scope is indicted, and the trial is set to begin. Also really important to note in this, the consequences of the Scope trial itself is a misdemeanor and a fine of $100 to $500. So it's really doesn't matter in terms of the law itself. It only matters in the context of this larger discussion of creation versus evolution and the role of Christianity in schools. So the judge in the case, John Ralston, begins the trial with reading a King James version of Genesis and the story of creation, as well as a prayer. So in the very beginning, he very strongly asserts his beliefs, and actually, it's just kind of a funny and a quippy way to begin this entire thing. And William Jennings Bryan, who is an outspoken creationist and opponent of evolution, actually agrees to be part of the prosecution, which ensures that it's going to get national attention. And there's an incredible amount of media coverage for the event, including WGN, who spends $1,000 to broadcast this live over the radio. Inevitably, Scopes is found guilty in Tennessee. And then following that, Jennings dies. And importantly, also, when the Tennessee Supreme Court actually takes a look at this, they don't rule anything different. They rule that the Butler Law is actually constitutional, but they allow Scopes to be his verdict to be overturned on a technicality, which is kind of interesting, and it's really a way to not prolong the case and not to force it up to higher levels of judicial judgment. But why does this matter? Big picture, because following this, Mississippi passes a law banning evolution in 1926. And then in the 1960s and the 1980s, states pass laws that require equal time between evolution and creation. And also that if you're teaching evolution, you have to actually give a disclaimer. So it's something that's still debated today. As of today, it's not really something that we've decided. I mean, other issues very similar to this, like prayer in schools, have also been something that's been debated at a very high legal level. But I guess the bigger picture of like why we care about this in general is it shows a massive shift in the actual the nation itself and the belief of what Christian teaching should be in schools and what shouldn't. And as we've seen through the last 60 or 70 years, we've even progressed further from where we were at the Scopes trial when they affirmed the constitutionality of teaching creation and banning evolution. But we still haven't gotten to the point where we've completely eliminated all Christianity or like prayer and those types of things in schools. So I hope that you guys found this interesting and informative. I think there's a lot of information around this. I probably could talk about law and legal things for forever, but for this, I think that's really all that matters. Thanks, and have a good rest of your night.